If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What is the scariest thing you have seen? I am 26 years old. I live in Lower Mainland / Fraser Valley, British Columbia, Canada, and this experience still scares me to this day. Me and my friend saw a 7 to 8 feet tall pure white being with 2 arms in his backyard 5-acre forest in the rural part of my city at night. It was swaying back and forth silently and I felt like I was going to die. The same kind of creature was caught on camera and labeled the Fresno Nightcrawler. So entered my friend's backyard 5-acre forest at night close to 1 a.m. in the northwest rural part of my city, and both of us immediately saw something out of place down the path below about 30 to 40 feet away from us in between the trees that was tall, white and 3-dimensional. It appeared to be completely white and soft like light, but it did not illuminate the trees or ground around it. There was no face or any facial features we could see, no arms, and it was shaped in an upside down V or U. It was making creepy swaying movements with its whole body, 2 legs left to right back and forth silently, still standing on the forest floor in the exact same spot the whole time we saw it. It was so white that you could see the shadow being cast on it while it was swaying like it was a real animal. It did not pick up its legs or walk at all. I can only explain it as looking like 7 to 8 foot really white, soft, shiny separated curtains in the shape of a upside down V or U with bulkiness / shape to the top. The 2 long legs / arms looked like the frontal view of an ape's forearms would look like when they are crawling on all fours, as if the 2 long legs were hunched in front. It was moving left to right in a specific motion, standing on the forest floor in the same area between the trees, making absolutely no sound, and there was absolutely no wind. It was beautiful to look at but terrifying at the same time. We watched it in silence as it was swaying, and I started to feel impending doom. The sinking feeling in your chest set in and it felt like I was going to die or something bad was going to happen. I told my friend specifically, "I don't like this," he agreed, and we immediately left the forest. We went back in the morning and there was nothing out of the ordinary, spiderweb, garbage, etc., in the spot where we saw the supernatural being. These specific beings go by Sasayudal and various other names from different indigenous cultures here in the Lower Mainland / Fraser Valley, British Columbia, Canada. Here are the rough drawings I made of exactly what it looked like. Maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I went on a late-night bike ride to Niagara Falls, from my house in the neighboring town. It was kind of spooky fun going there at 1 a.m. with no one around, but that's not the scary part. Heading home around 2 a.m., I had to pass underneath the bridge leading back to Grand Island, where I lived at the time. Just on the other side of the dark underpass were 3 naked dudes throwing a rope up in a tree. One had a torch, like an honest-to-goodness Indiana Jones torch. They all just kind of looked at me as I rolled past. I noped out pretty fast. To get home, I had to sort of loop around from the bike path and double back to get onto the bridge. As I was climbing up the bridge, I chanced to look down on the scene I just passed. All 3 guys were just staring silently up at me. It was another big nope. It's 3 a.m. My bedroom door is half open and my fiancée is asleep next to me. I see a shadow of someone walking in the hallway. Then I see the person walking through the door. I am literally about to shit my pants. Then the person walks into my bedroom. It was an old birthday balloon that had floated to the ceiling a few weeks ago. The helium had leaked just enough to cause it to float 6 feet above the ground and hover silently into our room. My heart is racing just telling this story. I didn't see what I'm about to tell, and that made it worse. About 3 years ago, I moved into a new house. It was completely empty and that made every sound very loud inside the house. It was a huge, old house in a nice neighborhood. At the end of the day, I got into my room, closed the door and went to sleep, a little bit afraid because of some steps and doors closing sounds, but I convinced myself that they were coming from the neighbor's house, even though they felt right outside my bedroom's door. The night went on and I suddenly heard a woman screaming her lungs out in a very, very powerful way. My heart was bursting out, my body felt cold and numb, and then those screams became words. She was yelling with all her strengths, "WHO's there? WHO's there? WHO's." And then sudden silence. I thought about screaming back, offering help, but then I thought that maybe those screams were from inside my house. I could swear they came from inside, and that if I made any sound, I would attract this possible intruder to me, or I might even put that woman in even more danger. I did nothing but lay frozen on my inflatable bed for 2 or 3 hours with my mind running like crazy, alert to call the police in case I heard another weird sound. It felt like forever. When finally the sun came out, I went out of my room with a tripod ready to attack. What a weapon! There was nothing in there. It was my second day at my new job and my coworkers thought I had a bad dream or I was lying. At that night, me and a friend asked a neighbor if she had heard those noises and she said no. In a very nervous way, my friend also believed that I had a bad dream and I started to think I was getting crazy or something. I was doubting about myself. 2 weeks later, 2 friends moved in with me. They didn't believe me as well. About a month later, I heard those screams again, felt the same freezing feeling, and a few seconds later, one of my roomies texted me confirming that she had heard the lady too. We kept listening to those screams for a couple of months after that, yelling different scary shit, never knew where they came from and they happened so fast, we couldn't record them to call the police with proofs. I was dating this girl a while back and was staying at her parents' house. I remember one morning we got into a fight which caused her to storm out of the room and go into her living room to do her makeup and get ready. I stayed in her bed watching TV. Her bedroom door was open and as I was watching TV I saw what looked like a silhouette in the doorway, and of course as I tried to focus on it, it disappeared. I didn't think too much on it and continued watching TV. A few minutes later I hear footsteps coming from the hallway, assuming my GF was coming back to apologize, but no one actually came into the room. So I decided after 5 minutes of waiting I'd go to her. This is where it gets weird. I asked her why she went through the hallway, which she just responded with I didn't, and looked at me confused. Then she said, "I thought that was you." A little freaked out, we actually forgot about the fight and comforted each other. We ended up talking over the next 30 minutes and we were on our phones a bit here and there, but decided to set them down on the coffee table to focus and talk about the fight. That's when my phone's ringtone was going off. In the room down the hallway. We both looked at each other and down at my phone, just stunned. The second my phone ringtone ended in the other room, hers went off in the room. We left the house for the day. Luckily we were both ready anyways. We decided to go get food at Panera and mentioned I saw a silhouette in her room. That's when she asked if it was in the doorway. I know there will be skeptical people out here, but this is a 100% true story. The house was new when they moved in 12 years and some change prior to that day. The house was across from a Catholic church. I spent a summer working in Yosemite National Park. My workplace didn't have Wi-Fi, but the fancy lodge around 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, did. My workplace was allowed to use the Wi-Fi as long as gave paying lodge guests priority. Anyways. One night, I called my then partner and then my family. It is important to note that while I did have a bike that I usually rode to the lodge at night, this particular night I didn't feel like conquering the huge hill in the way to the lodge. By the time I was done chatting it was fast approaching 11 and dark. I quickly began walking back home as I had a morning shift. I leave the well-lit part of the lodge and slowly pass on to the dark Paces Road. As I get past the last of the lights, I notice persistent rustling in the forest surrounding the road. I blamed it on raccoons and kept waking. I take like 5 more steps. Realize it's too loud to be any number of raccoons. It was a fucking bear. A full-sized brown bear between me and the well-lit lodge. I assess my surroundings and back slowly around the curve. After being mostly sure I was out of sight, I sprinted back to my workplace, not stopping until I got to the staff quarters. Terrifying shit to see what could be your last moments flash before your eyes. I was happy I didn't see cubs, and I made sure to either ride my bike or bring coworkers when I went at night. A few years ago when I was probably 14 to 15 I was extremely anemic, and one day I woke up and like 3 a.m. to a wet face. I was tired, so I thought, oh, perhaps just drooling, so I wiped it and quickly fell back to sleep. 4 hours later I wake up to my school alarm, and as I lean over to my phone to shut off my alarm there must have been a full pint of blood, still fresh, all over my sheets, and I freaked the fuck out cause it looks like I'd been shot in face in my sleep with the amount of blood everywhere, all over my hands, face, hair, bedding and phone, so I get up to wash it off quickly. Forgetting standing up quickly completely shuts me off. I've got my hand under my face to catch the blood and I see my sister at the top of the stairs look at me and say, "Holy shit. Are you okay?" And that's when everything went gray. I blacked out. I woke up half an hour later with my parents and sisters around me. My other sister didn't even live with me at the time, so she had enough time to come from her house to mine before I woke up and my parents to wake up. Honestly, the scariest shit in my life, but I have to admit I found some sort of thrill while passing out. It felt somewhat peaceful falling down as everything turned gray and my hearing was similar to that of being underwater. I was late to school that day and was placed in isolation, so a big fuck you to Mr. Pearson. Was about 13 and hanging at a family friend's house overnight. The owner of said house told us all stories about a ghost that followed her around for her whole life that she likes to call Maud. Well, that night, I fell asleep by the wood stove, because it was really comfortable. Had some sleeping bags and so on, drifted off, and suddenly was awake again around 2 a.m. Both cats were right beside me, huddled up close, hair standing on end. I see two white feet, and only feet, run up the stairs, and suddenly, I hear a loud, alto range wail. Like 20 seconds, as loud as any person could wail. It sounded angry, desperate, and sad. I was terrified. I couldn't sleep for another 2 hours. I just hid under my covers and cried. I don't question spirits anymore. When everyone else woke back up, they said they didn't hear anything. But the owner said ha ha ha. Yeah, that sounds like Maud alright. I was about 15 years old, and during the summer of that year, my grandma had just moved into a new house that was about a 5-minute walk from my mom's. I had always loved going over to her house before, but where she had lived previously, spending time was a lot harder since she lived a lot farther away. Her new house was old, but it had a very cozy feeling to it. Though, the upstairs always unsettled me, more specifically, one of the 2 bedrooms that was there. It always had a heavy feeling that clung to the air, and my mood would always seem to sour if I spent any significant amount of time in there. Though, I just brushed it off to not being well acquainted with her house. On the small occasions when I would come back to my mom's house to grab some clothes or stay for a bit, my mom talked to me about my grandma's house and how it was haunted. It was all just bullshit and her trying to scare me, until she showed me an article that was written in 2009 about her house. I would provide the article link, but it shows private information that I don't wish to share publicly. After I read the article, I was very apprehensive about going back to my grandma's house, but I didn't really think anything would happen since it hadn't before. It was only about a couple days later did things actually start to happen. My brother also spent the summer at my grandma's as well, and would always stay in the basement since there was a small bed, a fridge, and a TV down there. My grandma and her husband were going out that day, so it'd just be me and my brother. I took a quick shower and went into the basement to tell my brother that we'd be alone for a bit. I could hear the sound of bare feet slap on the concrete. I laughed a little and told my brother to stop trying to scare me and that I heard his footsteps. I looked into the little offhand hallway where he stayed in. I kept calling out his name as I looked all over the basement for him, but he wasn't there. As I was turning to go back upstairs, I saw one of the mason jars that my grandma kept on top of her fridge topple and smash onto the ground. In that moment, I took off up the stairs, grabbed my belongings, and raced home to find my brother asleep on the couch. Warning, this is disturbing. This still haunts me to this day. Me and a buddy of mine went down this trail on our dirt bikes. We just got off the trail and headed back down the twisty road. We were having fun around the corners until we saw a cyclist walking down the road. At least that's what we assumed that he is, judging from his gear. Me and my buddy both felt bad for the poor sap since we thought some punk stole his bicycle from him or something, so we pulled off to the side of the road. I noticed that his left thigh is bleeding profusely as we could see a big gash and could almost see the bone. We told him to sit down, and I took out my extra shirt from my backpack and wrapped it around his thigh while my buddy called for an ambulance. I kept asking the dude's name, but he wasn't talking properly, so I just assumed that he is in a lot of pain and is going through shock. I had first aid training, so I keep asking him what was his name. He never answered since the whole time I was talking to him he was looking straight along the road. 5 minutes later he told me to go check on his brother. I was wondering who he was referring to since he was the only cyclist we found, so I told him, "What's his number? Let me call him for you." He looked at me dead in the eyes and said he went down the ravine. Out of panic I stood up and looked around. Sure enough, about 10 feet away I saw 2 broken bicycles that crashed on the metal barrier. I rushed to the scene and looked below the ravine, and there I saw a man, mangled beyond recognition. His spine was twisted to the left, and his head twisted to the right. His eyes fixed on mine as I hear him whisper help, and his eyes rolled onto the top of his eyelids. Ambulance arrived. The guy on the ravine died, while the brother who had a broken leg survived. I never forgot their faces. To this day on, I always tell myself that all of that was just a dream. My buddy still has those pictures taken from his GoPro camera. This happened just a year ago. A few years ago my family and I lived in a house with a rather large basement. Our basement had a door which led to a smaller room where my dad mainly kept his tools. When I was about 16 I went downstairs to get a textbook because I was working on a science project. This was about at 3 a.m. I went downstairs and turned the light on. While I was halfway down the stairs, the doorknob on the door which led to a smaller room started violently shaking. Whoever was trying to open the door couldn't because the door was locked. Then they banged on the door one time and stopped. I thought it could have my brother or dad who probably got stuck in there, so I wanted to go check. But just in case I went back upstairs to pick up my dad's hunting rifle. With my heart beating out of my chest I opened the door and no one was there. This is impossible because there is no other way out of the small door other than that door. And even if the person who was violently shaking the doorknob opened the door and left, I would have seen him slash her while I was upstairs grabbing the rifle. My parents dismissed it as me hallucinating, but I know what I saw. Thankfully, we moved out a while back. By far the scariest moment of my life. I was taking a trip down south with my grandparents and some of their friends from work. We planned to go to a rocky beach one day, then head back to catch some shut-eye at the nearest large city. The first day went great. We saw some wildlife, crossed the border at a national park, and got some great ice cream. It was on the drive back that this event happened. We were driving to the hotel where we were going to sleep. Despite me spending a lot of time with my grandparents, I felt oddly uneasy and at discomfort with my surroundings. It's almost like I knew something bad was going to happen. I began to doze off. Being the young child, it wasn't easy to stay up that late, although of course I wanted to. I was in a kinda half awake, half asleep state when all I heard was a loud crashing sound, which was odd because I didn't feel the car move much. It was only when I felt the wheel underneath me jump up, then fall back down, did I realize what happened. We had ran something or someone over. I instinctively looked back to see what it was, and I wish I hadn't. Chills went down my spine and I began to freak out to my grandpa about what just happened, blaming him for it. What I saw wasn't a human, thank God, but it was a deer turned upside down, struggling to either stand back up or just struggling due to the pain. In the midst of me throwing a fit, an outrageously loud popping sound erupted from the passenger side tire. I instantly began crying even harder, imagining the worst, that we had popped a tire and would be stuck. I'm not sure how many years ago that was, but every time I think back to that night my heart drops into my stomach. I can't even drive late at night much anymore. If I do, I get anxiety, which had never happened prior to that night. It might not seem that bad, but it's one of the only events that have really hit me hard. This one is more paranormal and there are two of them. Story 1, I'm about 5 at the time and trying to fall asleep, but this is soon interrupted by a deep voice throwing slurs at me. I don't really remember it, but it said something like this: "You will never resort to anything, you fucking piece of SHT," and other things similar to that. After all of this ends, I go in my parents' room and violently shake my dad in order to wake him up. He thinks I'm a robber and grabs me by the shirt. This was in self-defense. My dad is in no way, shape, or form abusive. Figuring out it was me, he puts me down and lets me sleep with him. Now for story 2, this one takes place about a year ago, where I was once again trying to sleep, feeling restless. When I get up, I see a odd-looking blob. It wasn't a liquid-looking material, it looked more like moving scribbles, emitting a scraping noise. Me thinking that it was like one of those things that you see in the corner of your eyes, I blink only for it to move to the other side of my room. So I blink again and now it's at the foot of my bed. Me freaking out, blinks again, now it's on my bed. I blink for a final time and it disappears. So my father was in the military for 30 years, meaning we moved a crap ton. We ended up in England for 3 years, and as you may know, there is some very rich and old history there. We were stationed about 2 hours from London. The whole neighborhood was pretty old, but houses on the inside were nice. Anyway, there was always rumors that the whole neighborhood was built on some sort of burial ground, maybe Roman? One morning I had just gotten up for school and was heading to my bathroom, which I shared with no one, and like I said earlier, old house, so the bathroom was laid out kinda odd, so stay with me. When you walk in, the sink on the back wall in front of you, and to the right I had a full-length mirror hanging up on the wall and nothing on the left wall. The shower and shitter were in like the other room/portion of the bathroom. Back to the morning, I walk in and the mirror is hanging on the opposite wall, like someone took the nail out and put it in the other wall. To say the least, I was very weirded out. Then I noticed it was very cold in as well, and I look in the shower/shitter room and the window is wide open. And another fact about British houses, the windows don't have screens, so like I still don't know to this day. I asked everyone who lived in my house about it, and they all actually had no clue. Warning, could be sensitive to some folks. I apologize for how long it is. When I was 8, my mother's ex-boyfriend's 17-year-old son would sneak into my room. And no, it wasn't to check on me, but for the sake of everyone's sanity reading this, I won't go any further into explanation than that. While that alone is scary enough, what really shuddered me and even to this day causes me to shake is the memory of running down the hall into the living room where I knew my older sister and her friend were sleeping. In my juvenile mind, I figured my, at the time, 11-year-old sister could save me. Confused at why I had been up at that hour and wondering why I was so scared, she asked me what's wrong. I just point to where I came from. And somehow, the moonlight from a window behind him hid his identity. He was a perfect silhouette in the already dark hallway. And while he never said a word, barely even flinched, I knew he saw me, saw us staring right back at him. He had been caught and he knew it. I cautiously break my stare down to see my sister next to me, standing tall in her place and needing no more explanation, scrunch her eyes into a death glare like you can't imagine any 11-year-old managing. Silently, without breaking gaze, he walked back into his room without a sound to prove he was real. That last line isn't meant to be poetic. I heard nothing from him. I remember thinking it looked as if he were gliding on thin air and not actually walking. Like a ghost. 20 years later, the heat of his invisible stare still haunts me, and on a really weak night, I unintentionally see his hovering shadow in my own home still staring me down. The story isn't too creepy, but it scared the shit out of me. So this happens when I was about 14-15 years old. My dad, sister and I were on holidays in a rural town on the coast of Spain. We had gotten takeaway pizza for dinner and ate it at the beach. After sunset we decided to go on a night walk, and hopefully end back at the hotel. We followed this dirt road through the woods which eventually lead to a quiet street where the town ended. Facing the woods, at the end of that street there was a white van with sun reflectors and sheets covering the windows. I found that weird because it was the middle of the night, so there was no need to block out the sun or any light. A buff middle-aged man was standing right outside the sliding door with his hands crossed. The door was slit a crack open, and before he shut it I saw a woman on the floor of the van with a piece of cloth strapped around her mouth. She was in distress, her eyes wide and her hair a mess. My heart dropped and I froze. I whispered to my dad, who was next to me, that there was a woman in the van, and he didn't believe me. I almost started crying on the spot. Once we were out of view of the van, my dad told me he believed me but just didn't want the man to know we'd seen something. We went straight to the police station. I later found out that the cops went there immediately, and when they got there, there was no trace of the van. To this day I still wonder what happened to that woman. The thing I encountered while driving at night in Central Europe, Moravian region, from the forested hill region of Moravian Karst into a city called Brno. Standing on four legs, the head was higher than the roof of my SUV, it was in dark and it seemed to have some fur in some parts, the rest was just impossible to see. It was like the light from my car didn't reflect from it. It was a solid gray, probably cover. It had no visible eyes, no visible mouth, but the head was very long. The shape of the body itself reminded me of an enormous beast, like a wolfhound, but not exactly. The legs were more straight, like of a cattle. I could not see the shape of its stomach, but the ribcage was incredibly huge, with fur on the bottom. It walked, jumped on the road from a slope, right in front of my car. I was lucky to go slowly, as there was a bit of fog that night. It stopped. I managed to brake right in front of me. I stood there for a second, maybe two, and then with couple of steps walked across the road and into the field heading to the forest, into the Reykjavik Creek. My family lived on top of a mountain in Montana when I was little, around 8 years old. A neighbor had his trash torn up and a car window busted by a black bear a week before, but nothing else was heard out of it for a while. Well, me and my two sisters were outside playing when I got this gut feeling that we needed to get in the house immediately. Like my stomach dropped. So I picked up my youngest sister, who was 3, and told the other two we needed to get in the house. As we were going in, I heard the dogs in the house across from us start barking like crazy. About 10 minutes later that bear is walking past our front door. Pretty sure that was the scariest thing I've seen and felt, because pretty sure if I hadn't listened to myself one of us could have been killed. Once I had to get up really early in the morning to go on a trip for my job. It was about 3:30 in the morning and I had forgotten to go and get gas for my car the night before. I stopped at a gas station about a mile away from my house because it was well lit and it was in a nicer area. Anyways, I was pumping gas and then I got the weirdest feeling that I needed to move. I moved behind my car and then away from it, and then I noticed this huge guy hiding in front of my car. He was sneaking towards me when I got the urge to get away from my car. I was completely alone and I'm just a small girl. I almost always have mace or something with me if I am by myself. This time I had a knife and pulled it out and started screaming bloody murder for him to get the hell away from me. Then he started moving closer around my car to me. I screamed even louder and an attendant came out who called the cops. Definitely one of the scariest moments of my life. This is not something I saw, really, but experienced. Around 2 years ago my best friend, her mom, and her sister took a road trip to Idaho to go camping and reconnect with each other and ourselves. My friend's family were super into road trips and frequently went camping. We are originally from Oklahoma, so none of us really had any experience camping in mountainous regions, but we were pretty confident that we would be okay. We stopped at a Koa place because we heard those were pretty safe places to camp, but it was still in the city and it was more like glamping, where people brought their RVs and stuff and watched TV instead of traditional camping. We wanted a real, deep in the woods type of camping, so we drove through the camp just kind of looking around, and then this guy waves us over. He was pretty forceful when he asks my friend's mom what we're doing. He leans on the car window and looks in at each of us. He says that people live there and we better be careful driving around and looking at people's houses. She tells him we're looking for a place to camp. He leans back off the car and says, well, you can't stay here, we're full up. But if you're looking for somewhere more remote, you can go up the road, around 40 miles from town, up into the mountains. There's camping grounds there. And you won't have to pay like you would here. We say okay, thank you, and head up. When we leave, he tells us to be careful. So we drive up into the mountain and find a nice little camping area next to a stream. You can see our campsite from the road, but can't really see the road from the campsite unless you're looking through the trees. We haven't seen anyone or any other cars since we left the Koa site. We drove all the way up to the top of the mountain and then back down to our area. Usually, there would be people all over, but it's not skiing season yet, so it seems we're all alone on the mountain. Perfect. Exactly the sort of atmosphere we wanted. We set up camp and my friend and I go survey the area. We find some horse tracks / droppings in the woods close to the camp, even though the only house we saw coming in was at the base of the mountain, and there were no horses there. I'm a criminal psychology major, so I jokingly comment on how easy it would be to kidnap all of us here. 4 women, no weapons, in the middle of nowhere, from a different state. There was no cell phone reception. The stream would cover any sounds of people outside our tent, and if they're on horses, well, no tracks. This unsettles my friend, so I shut up. As the sun began to set, I started to get the weirdest feeling. I don't believe in intuition or anything like that, so I just tell myself that the feeling I'm having is from my anxiety. But it's different. It's like a gut-wrenching feeling that I've never had before or since. We lay down to go to sleep. After about an hour of trying to sleep, I turn over because I cannot shake this feeling. I see my friend, who is also wide awake. I say, "Are you okay?" And she says, "Yeah, I just feel weird." At this point, this feeling is so intense that I have to sit up. Everything in my body is saying, if you don't get out of this tent, you are going to die. I tell my friend and her family that I'm going to go sit in the car because I'm cold. My friend says she'll come with me. So we both go sit in the car. It's about 2 a.m. at this point. We're talking about random stuff, and finally she says she thinks she'll be able to go to sleep. So I let her sleep in the passenger seat, while I just look around and try to place this feeling I'm having. The moon was unbelievably bright that night, and I'm just looking up through the sunroof and looking at the stars. The feeling is starting to slowly subside, and I start to unwind a bit. I'm literally just falling asleep when I'm jolted awake. It felt like I had been electrocuted. I sit straight up and look around, certain that someone will be standing outside the car, ready to kill me. Nothing. No one. I cannot shake this feeling, though. I tell myself I just freaked myself out and force myself to lay back down. As soon as my head hits the headrest, I see a pair of headlights driving up the mountain. Okay. Weird. We haven't seen anyone else in probably 14 hours since we've been there. And this person is driving around at 3 o'clock in the morning. I watch them pass the entrance to our campsite and am just about to get out of the car to go pee when I see reverse lights, and then headlights coming down the entrance to our camp. I shake my friend awake and say, "Someone is here. We need to leave. Now." She wakes up and notices I'm talking very fast with tears streaming down my face. I don't even remember beginning to cry. I have never been that afraid in my life. I didn't know who / what was in that truck, but I was convinced that if we stayed to find out, we would never be heard from again. We both watched the truck come down our path, pass our car, and pull into the vacant campsite next to ours. It's hard to see through the trees, but we see several people get out of the truck. At this point, we realize we have nothing to defend ourselves with. We don't even have the car keys. The only option is to get out of the car, go wake up her mom and sister, and leave. I open my door as silently as possible, but the interior light comes on and we both say fuck it. We run to the tent and wake them up saying, "Someone is here in that truck over there. We have a really bad feeling. We need to go." Her sister gets out of the tent, upset that we woke her up. She takes one look at my face and starts packing. The site took around an hour and a half to set up and about 15 minutes to be packed with us in the car. We leave, and as soon as we turn down the main road towards town, the feeling I've been having all night goes away all at once. We slept in a hotel that night and found a campsite with more people and cell phone reception to finish our week of camping. I've never felt that feeling since, and I still don't know what caused me to jolt awake before I saw the headlights. We got home after a church choir thing, around 9 p.m., and our 2 dogs weren't waiting for us at the garage door like usual. We figured they were outside. They had a doggy door we left open to the backyard, so my brother and I called for them to come in. They always came when called. They didn't come. My brother and I got our parents' attention, and we all began looking for them. I went outside. The gate was wide open. They were gone. I remember my mom screaming at my dad that he better find them or she would never forgive him. He had apparently left it open while working on a project. My mom was screaming like a freaking banshee. She loved those dogs and raised them from puppies. My dad and brother went in my dad's car to search the neighborhood. My mom started writing to her Facebook group to keep an eye out for them. All the while my mom kept telling me they're gone. Can you believe they're gone? They're never coming back, they're gone forever. She says she doesn't remember saying all that stuff, but I can still hear her voice. Kind of traumatizing lol. My mom suddenly got a phone call. Someone found the dogs, thank God they had up-to-date tags. They were close, at an intersection near our house. We got in my mom's car and raced to get them. Two amazing people stopped their car and opened a box of their own cereal to try and lower my dogs into their car, keeping them safe. One of my dogs went with them, the other was more skeptical, so they just held onto her back on the side of the road. We got the dogs back, thanked them profusely of course, then just went home with the dogs. They were so happy to be back lol. That open gate is probably the scariest thing I've seen, just the feeling when I realized the dogs were gone. My heart sank. When I was about 22 I decided to try mushrooms with a group of friends. I had no idea what the power of psychedelics could be like, and it's something I never want to experience again. Anyways, 3 friends and myself order a pizza and take the mushrooms. After about 45 minutes they start kicking in. I remember starting to feel very small in a large room. Colors were becoming very saturated and I saw images moving here and there. It was really cool. I consider this the first part of the trip, and if mushrooms were always like this I would probably be doing them all of the time. The second part of the trip is where things became catastrophic. So we head down into my friend's basement. Put on some music and just look at our surroundings. This is where you kind of lose control of your thoughts or how to react right in a normal situation. I remember my one friend would go from laughing to crying in a matter of seconds back and forth. I stood in the middle of the room watching a pattern on the floor turn into rainbow shapes, which then turned everything into colorful children's toy blocks, so it looked like I was in a child's playroom. I remember looking at my friend who was sitting in a chair. I remember his face turning ghostly white. I remember him slumping over in the chair and falling to the floor. I remember my other friend jumping up in a panic shouting his name. I remember my friend shouting to call 911. I had to run upstairs on mushrooms and call the police, but the words couldn't come out. I couldn't make sense of what I was looking at or who I was talking to. Eventually my friend who had the most experience on psychedelic drugs took the phone from me and was able to tell the police that our friend wasn't breathing and that we were all on mushrooms. 5 minutes later the whole police force shows up at the house. I'm tripping my balls off, and it looks like there's giant demon men glaring down at me and I'm having a major panic attack. My friend got arrested for having MJ on him, but luckily there were no mushrooms since we ate them all. We were questioned and searched, and they searched the house for more paraphernalia, not finding much else other than a few bored college kids on drugs. My other friend who stopped breathing ended up being okay, and there was really no explanation as to why he passed out like he did. So what turned out to be a fun experimental night turned into one of horror that my friends and I are afraid to talk about to each other to this day. The image of my friend turning white and falling to the floor while tripping haunted me for a long time after that. I'm just glad he turned out okay. But even the thought of returning to the house that happened at raises my anxiety. As a paranormal investigator, I have seen activity in people's homes that have made me numb to terror. I attest to and say with absolute honesty I have encountered activity where I have witnessed and interacted with ghosts, demons, jinn, and possibly elementals, fairies. I have seen full-body apparitions, seen a demon with my own eyes, and seen a picture of what best can be called a fairy. I have heard without aid of any device ghosts speaking. I have heard a demon growl at me. I have spoken the Maidu language and heard in response, drumbeats. I have recorded ifs of ghosts and demons. I have had ghosts attack me varying in severity from a simple touch, to being hit so hard I have been knocked out. I have had ghosts follow me home from investigations and move chairs, hit me in the groin, knock Sage onto the ground, hit my gas pedal, grab my steering wheel. One held me win at the casino making sure the ball landed on black at the roulette table. I had this one lady ghost hit me whenever I flirted with a lady. She punched my manager in the head, and grabbed the hair of a lady I was sitting next to. I can go on and on with stories, and I know I sound crazy, but ask any question about my experiences or ghost hunting and I will be honest. I live in Moose Country. Anyone who lives in Moose Country knows if you hit one on the highway, you're dead. Full stop. Either the neck trauma from slamming into it going 100 to 120 on the highway, or the weight of the beast from its body landing on you and crushing you. You can also die in more freak ways after hitting a moose, like if their antlers strike you or if the windshield cuts you in a bad spot, but that's way less likely. You can even die if you try to veer away and send your car into a tumble. And they love to cross the highway in wintertime at night, which is just the fucking worst. Anyways, my dad was driving my sister and I on the highway in Alberta at about 10 p.m. during a heavy snowfall. My dad and I were talking for a while, and the conversation died down just long enough to see a gigantic animal like 30 meters ahead of us. My dad yelled moose and veered left hard. We missed its shoulder by 10 centimeters. If he had hit the moose's shoulder, I would have been the one most affected by the animal. My dad saved everyone's life, and if he had veered a half second later, he might have been down one son. The moose was right outside my window, and I'll never forget it. That must have been when I was 13 or 14. Whenever I drive on the highway, I make sure to look real hard at the sides of the road, and I straight up don't drive during nighttime snowfall. One morning, 2 years ago, my then 4-year-old daughter hadn't woken up yet. No big deal, all my kids are night owls. I sent my oldest up to get her. She comes right back down, telling me that something is wrong and the 4-year-old is shaking. I rush up the stairs, and my brain almost broke. With no history of seizures, no sickness, nothing, my 4-year-old was trying to yell my name but was otherwise unresponsive. She was violently seizing. I yelled for my husband to call 911. The paramedics didn't get there for another 7 minutes, at which point our daughter was totally unresponsive. I remember yelling at the 911 operator who was trying to tell me to stay calm. I remember, as I passed her off to the paramedic on our front porch, distinctly thinking that she may either die or suffer severe brain damage. My daughter told me later that she kept yelling my name but it didn't work. It's been 2 years. We have no idea why she had seizures, but she's been seizure-free since 2018. It was the most horrifying thing I have ever seen, and my blood pressure will never be the same. My ex-girlfriend was at my house once, and while we were making breakfast she said she didn't feel well. She was pale, and so I told her to sit down. I had my back turned to her, and all of a sudden she was convulsing and making gurgling noises. I turned around and thought she was joking at first, but when her eyes rolled to the back of her head and she slipped off the chair, I managed to catch her. I became really scared. She pissed herself, and since I'd seen my granddad have epileptic seizures, I managed to keep a clear head and help her. I put a spoon in her mouth so she wouldn't choke on her tongue and stayed with her until she gained consciousness. It didn't take long for her to wake up, maybe a minute or two, but when she did wake up she was completely oblivious to what had happened. I calmly explained to her and sent her to take a shower with some clean clothes. While still making breakfast and cleaning up her piss, I kept checking on her in the shower to make sure she didn't fall or have another seizure. She ended up okay, but I was really shaken up by that. We broke up after she had told me that had happened before, and she refused to have treatment or get seen by a doctor about it. Her parents insisted she was fine, and I thought to myself, if she's with me one day and that happens again, and she doesn't wake up, her parents would blame me. I once had a lightning bolt crash a few meters away from me. I was on the second floor of my aunt's house, just reading and listening to music. It was an extremely stormy day and the windows were rattling hard because of the wind. I'm usually fond of rain, but storms are pretty scary, especially if you're near the ocean, which we were. For reference, my aunt's house stays right beside the neighbor's house, which is a one-floor house. They kind of share a wall, as most Brazilian houses do. So, the ceiling to that house was very close to where I was, only a few meters away. Suddenly, there's this blinding flash of light out of nowhere, followed by what I can only describe as the sound of fireworks going off really close. And like a second after that, a deafening roar of an explosion. I actually jumped out of the couch because of how sudden it was. All lights went out, my ears were ringing, and there was this overpowering smell of something burning. I went downstairs to check on everyone and try to understand just what the hell happened. Sure enough, my uncle tells me that lightning just struck on the house next door. We called the neighbor's cell phone to ask if everything was alright, because no way in hell anyone was going outside, and she tells us that part of her ceiling and wall broke and that her TV and fridge were fried. When I realized how close I was from a lightning bolt, I started shaking, and since then, I stay downstairs whenever it looks like a storm is brewing there. Kind of scary to think how powerful lightning is. I mean, it broke through concrete. Well, one time I came home from school, and because my parents divorced, I only could talk to my dad on the phone. Now that sad day I heard the phone ring. Oh, that familiar ring. I pick it up and say in with an annoyed voice, "Yes." My dad picked up and said, "Hey son, is mom home?" Me, "Yes dad, why?" Dad, could you give her the phone? Me, "Sure, but why?" You don't like talking to her. Dad, just give her the phone. Now I went and gave her the phone, my mom with an also annoyed voice, what? She starts nodding and MHMing, now she has a sudden OF at CK face. I knew something was bad. Now my mother at dinner sat me down, and said my uncle died. Who I was very close to. I went paralyzed, and thought about every memory. He was very close to me. That day I cried trough the whole night. Now this is not the worst part. We go to his funeral, and his ex was somehow there. It was open casket, and where I live it's tradition to say goodbye to the dead body. I go up, say my goodbyes, continue crying. At long last his ex goes up, who he hated, and starts to say something. It was not a goodbye. She started mocking him. Look who's dead now, douchebag. Etc. Everyone's not gonna lie, my mom was furious, too tough, she did not like him, and then she starts beating the dead body. My dad and me were the only one who got out of the shock. My dad goes over there, grabs her, and literally throws her over his damn head. She was small, 150 centimeters, my dad was 2 meters, she ran away, we did not talk to her for like a decade. She then tries to sue my dad. Ike why? He wins the case, gets a bunch of money, gets a restraining order, and bans her out of the cemetery. Ike why he didn't ban her earlier.